1944. 2 meals, eaten on the same day, on opposite sides of the same war. And if you could set them side by side on one table, they would tell you, more completely than any battle map or production chart, exactly how the war was going to end. The first meal belongs to a German general, a real one, a man of high rank, with the authority to command thousands, decorated, powerful, at the top of one of the most formidable military hierarchies the world has ever produced. And by 1944, especially as the situation deteriorated, the food on his table, while certainly better than what his soldiers got, was not what you would imagine for a man of his rank. The German food situation as a whole had degraded badly. The blockade, the loss of resources, the general collapse of supply meant that even the privileged ate a diet that had grown narrower, plainer, more dependent on the same substitutes and shortages that afflicted everyone. Real coffee had become a memory, replaced by the ersatz we have discussed. Variety had shrunk. The abundance of peacetime was long gone. A German general in the later war ate better than his men, yes, but he ate as a man of a nation under blockade and running short, and his table reflected a country that could no longer feed even its elite the way it once had. The second meal belongs to an American private, the lowest rank there is, an ordinary young man, a buck private, at the very bottom of the American military hierarchy, a man who took orders from everyone and gave them to no one. And the food available to that private, through the ration system we have examined, through the mess halls and field kitchens and the vast supply chain behind them, was, in quantity, in variety, in quality, and in sheer reliability, genuinely remarkable. Meat regularly, real coffee, as much as he wanted, fruit, vegetables, bread, dessert, canned goods of astonishing variety, and behind the food, the small luxuries, the chocolate, the chewing gum, the cigarettes, that came as a matter of course. And here is the thing that should stop you, the comparison that contains the whole war. There is a real sense in which the American private, the lowest man in his army, ate as well as or better than the German general, one of the highest men in his. The abundance available to the ordinary American soldier was so great that it exceeded, in important respects, what rank and privilege could secure on the German side. The bottom of the American hierarchy ate at a level the top of the German hierarchy could increasingly only remember. If you were that German general, and you understood this, and some of them did, and remarked on it, it would have been a bitter and clarifying thing to understand, because rank is supposed to mean something. Privilege is supposed to secure advantages, and here was a war in which the enemy's lowest private was better supplied than you, a general, because the enemy's abundance was so vast that it lifted even the bottom of its hierarchy above the top of yours. This is not a story about meals. This is a forensic audit of what it means when the lowest-ranking soldier in one army eats better than the highest-ranking in another, of the staggering imbalance in national wealth and productive capacity that this single comparison reveals, and of why an army whose privates ate like the enemy's generals was an army that was going to win. Part 1. The German Calculus. To understand how a German general could end up eating worse than an American private, you have to understand the German food situation, and it is a story of a nation slowly strangled, in which even rank and power could not, in the end, escape the general scarcity. Germany's food problem was structural, and it was severe, and it got worse as the war went on. Germany was not agriculturally self-sufficient, and the blockade cut it off from imports, and the demands of total war pulled labor and resources away from agriculture, and the territories it occupied were exploited but could not fully make up the shortfall. The result was a food supply that was chronically strained and that deteriorated steadily, so that rationing grew tighter, quality fell, and the substitutes multiplied. The ersatz coffee, the adulterated everything, the general narrowing and worsening of the German diet that reached from the home front to the fighting front. Now, rank did secure advantages, and we should be clear about that. A German general did not eat like a frontline private, and did not starve. The officer class, and especially the higher ranks, had access to better food than the ordinary soldier and the ordinary civilian. Privilege was real, and it bought a better table. This was true in the German system, as it is true in most systems. But here is the crucial point. The German general's advantage was relative to a baseline that was itself falling. He ate better than his men, but his men ate poorly and worse over time. And better than poorly is not the same as well. The whole German food economy was contracting, and the general's privileged share was a larger slice of a shrinking pie. He could command the best available, but the best available, in a blockaded and increasingly desperate Germany, was not what it had been, and it was not remotely what the enemy could provide even to its lowest ranks. Privilege can secure you the top of your own system, but it cannot lift you above the ceiling of your entire nation's resources, and Germany's ceiling was falling. And there is a deeper dimension here, which is what this scarcity did to morale and to the sense of how the war was going. Food is one of the most immediate and visceral indicators of a nation's condition. When even the generals are eating ersatz coffee and a narrowing diet, when the abundance of former times is a memory even at the top, it tells everyone, at a level below argument, that the nation is in trouble. And when German officers encountered captured American supplies, the abundance of the enemy's food, the quality and variety and sheer quantity available even to the enemy's privates, the contrast delivered a message that no propaganda could counter. Their own tables, even the privileged ones, told them their nation was running short. The enemy's tables, even the humblest ones, told them the enemy was not. That is the German calculus. A nation whose food economy was strangled by blockade and total war, in which even the privilege of high rank could secure only a larger share of a shrinking supply, so that the German general, for all his power, ate a diet that had narrowed and worsened along with his whole nation's, and that was, in the end, poorer than what the enemy handed to its lowest-ranking men as a matter of routine. Now let us look at the table of the American private. Part 2. The American answer. The food available to the ordinary American soldier was one of the quiet wonders of the war, and it was the product of the same combination we have found behind every American advantage: staggering material abundance, delivered by a sophisticated logistical system, directed by a philosophy that valued the ordinary man. Start with the abundance itself. The United States was an agricultural superpower of almost unimaginable productivity, a continent of farmland barely touched by the war, producing food in quantities that dwarfed anything the other combatants could manage. Where Germany was strangled by blockade and shortage, America was overflowing, so much food that it could feed its own population well, feed its allies, and feed its enormous military lavishly, all at once, without strain. The foundation of the American private's remarkable diet was simply that America had food in a superabundance that no blockade threatened and no shortage constrained. Then the system that delivered it. The American military food system was elaborate and effective. The field kitchens that brought hot meals forward, the mess halls, the ration system with its various types designed for different situations, the vast supply chain that carried food across oceans and up to the front. We have examined this logistical machine throughout this series, and food rode on it in abundance, delivered to the soldier with a reliability that meant he could count on eating, and eating well, as a normal condition of his service. And then the variety and quality that this abundance and this system made possible. The American soldier, in reasonable conditions, ate meat regularly, a luxury in much of the wartime world. He had real coffee, freely. He had fruit and vegetables, bread, and often dessert. His canned rations, even in the field, contained a variety and quality that astonished soldiers of other armies. And beyond the meals, the small luxuries flowed to him as a matter of course. The chocolate, the candy, the chewing gum, the cigarettes, the little pleasures that we have discussed as morale items, all of them abundant. Now, we should be honest and not romanticize. The American soldier complained about his food, as all soldiers do, and the field rations eaten in combat were monotonous and disliked, and conditions at the sharp end could mean going without hot food for stretches. The reality was not a continuous banquet, but the baseline, the normal, sustained, reliable level of American military feeding was so far above what the other armies could manage that even the complaints were, in a sense, a luxury. The American soldier complained about the monotony of an abundance that the German soldier, and even the German general, would have found astonishing. And consider the sheer engineering of American military feeding, because it reflects the same systematic abundance we have found everywhere. The Americans developed a whole family of rations, each designed for a specific situation. There was the ration for the field kitchen, feeding men in bulk with cooked hot meals. There was the packaged ration for when hot food could not be brought forward, a complete day's meals in a box, monotonous but nourishing and reliable. There was the emergency ration, a concentrated bar of calories to keep a man going when nothing else could reach him. There was even a ration built around the small comforts, the chocolate, the gum, the cigarettes, the accessory items, treated as a category worth designing and supplying. This was not a nation throwing food at its soldiers haphazardly. It was a nation that had studied the problem of feeding an army in every situation and engineered a solution for each one, backed by an abundance deep enough to make every solution work. And consider the calories. The American ration was designed to deliver an enormous number of calories per man per day, a lavish energy budget that reflected the assumption that the soldiers should be well-fueled for the hard physical work of war. Where other armies, and especially the increasingly strained German one, had to trim the ration and accept that their men would be underfed, the American assumption was abundance. Feed the man fully, keep him strong, spend the calories freely, because there were plenty. The full plate was not an accident or a kindness alone. It was a design specification, met by a nation that had the food to meet it. And here is the comparison that defines the whole thing. Put the American private's normal diet next to the German generals in the later war, and the privates is competitive with, and in important respects superior to, the generals. The meat, the real coffee, the variety, the small luxuries, the American private had, as a matter of routine, things that the German general could increasingly secure only with difficulty or not at all. The bottom of the American hierarchy was supplied at a level that rivaled or exceeded the top of the German one. This is a staggering fact, and it is worth sitting with, because it captures the material reality of the war more completely than almost anything else. Rank is the whole logic of a military hierarchy. It is supposed to secure advantage. And the American abundance was so vast that it overrode rank across armies, that it lifted the American private above the German general in the most basic and visceral of matters, the food on the table. The American system did not feed its privates like privates. It fed them by the standards of the enemy like generals, because it could, because the abundance was that great, and because the American way of war held that the ordinary soldier was worth feeding well. The German general ate the narrowing diet of a nation running short. The American private ate the abundance of a nation overflowing, and the private's table was the better one. Part 3. The River of Steel. The meal on the American private's table connects to every theme this channel has developed, and the comparison with the general's table is a lens that brings the whole war into focus. It connects first to the theme of abundance as the foundation of everything. We have traced American abundance through fuel, ammunition, equipment, and every other category. Food is perhaps its most visceral and human expression. The superabundance of American agriculture, untouched by war and staggeringly productive, was the same kind of overwhelming material superiority that ran through the entire American war effort, and it showed up on the private's plate as surely as it showed up in the numbers of tanks and trucks. The full table was the war economy, made edible. It connects to the theme of the logistical system that converted abundance into delivered supply. Food, like everything else, had to be moved. Grown in America, processed, shipped across oceans, carried forward, cooked, and served, all in enormous quantity. The private's meal was the end point of the same vast logistical machine that delivered the fuel and the ammunition, and it required that machine's full capacity to feed millions of men well across the world. The abundance was necessary but not sufficient. It was the logistics that put the food on the plate. It connects to the theme of morale as a military asset. The Americans fed their soldiers well not only because they could, but because they understood that well-fed soldiers had better morale, better health, and better fighting power. The good food was a deliberate investment in the fighting man, of exactly the kind we have seen in the mail and the medical care and all the rest. The full table was a morale weapon, and the Americans wielded it deliberately. And it connects, most deeply, to the theme that has run through this entire channel, the value placed on the ordinary man. The most telling thing about the American private's table is not its abundance, but who it belonged to, the lowest-ranking man in the army. The American system fed its privates like the enemy's generals because it valued its privates, because its whole philosophy held that the ordinary soldier was worth the enormous effort of supplying lavishly. The German system, by necessity, and to some degree by philosophy, secured its best for its elite. The American system's abundance was so great, and its valuation of the ordinary man so high, that the ordinary man ate like an enemy elite. The table of the private was the democratic abundance of the American war machine, made visible in meat and coffee and bread. The German general, eating his narrowing diet, was eating the scarcity of a strangled nation that could no longer feed even its elite well. The American private, eating his abundant one, was eating the overflow of a superabundant nation that fed even its lowest ranks like royalty. And the gap between those two tables was the gap that was deciding the war. Part 4. The German Realization. The German realization about food, and about the shattering comparison between the enemy's privates and their own generals, was one of the most visceral and demoralizing understandings available to a German by the later war, precisely because food is so immediate and so hard to argue with. At the simplest level, German soldiers and officers who encountered captured American food supplies were confronted with undeniable physical evidence of the enemy's abundance. The captured stores, the abandoned supply dumps, the contents of the enemy's kitchens and ration boxes, all of it testified to a level of supply that the Germans could not match, and that grew more painful to witness as their own situation worsened. A hungry German soldier going through captured American rations was receiving a direct, sensory lesson in the material reality of the war. And the comparison of ranks made it sharper. A German officer who understood that the enemy's ordinary privates ate as well as or better than he did, despite his rank and his privilege, was confronting something that struck at the whole logic of his position. His rank was supposed to secure him advantages, and in his own system it did. But across the armies, the enemy's abundance had overridden his rank entirely, so that the lowest enemy soldier was supplied at a level his own high position could no longer guarantee. This was not just a material fact, it was a status wound, a reversal of the natural order in which rank secures privilege, and it told him, in the most personal way, that he was fighting a nation whose wealth simply dwarfed his own. And the deepest German realization was the one this channel arrives at from every direction. The food comparison was one more expression of the fundamental imbalance of the war, the gap between a strangled, resource-poor nation and an overflowing, superabundant one. The German general eating his narrowing diet and the American private eating his abundant one were not just two men at two tables. They were two economies, two nations, two war machines, reduced to the most human and visceral of comparisons. And the comparison said, unmistakably, that the American nation could provide for its people, even its humblest soldiers, on a scale that Germany could not match even for its elite. And a nation that can feed its privates, like the enemy's generals, is a nation with a material superiority so vast that, over the length of a long war, it is simply going to win. The German general, if he understood the comparison, understood that he was not merely losing battles. He was losing to a nation so much richer than his own that its lowest-ranking soldiers lived, in the most basic matter of daily bread, better than he did. And there is no more complete or more humbling measure of the imbalance of a war than that. The German general ate the best his failing nation could give him, and it was less than the enemy gave its privates. And in that single, bitter comparison was written the whole story of who was going to win. If your father, your grandfather, or your uncle served in that war, and remembered the food, the abundance of the American mess and the field kitchen, or, on the other side, the narrowing scarcity of a nation running short, I would be grateful to hear his name and his unit in the comments. Food is one of the most powerful memories any veteran carries, and the difference between the tables of the two armies was one of the truest measures of the war. They are mostly gone now. What remains are the stories their families carry. Those stories belong in the record. Part 5. The Verdict. 1945. The war ends, and among all the ways of measuring the vast imbalance that decided it, one of the simplest and most human is the comparison of two tables, the German generals and the American privates, and of what it meant that the privates was the better one. So here is the verdict. The German general ate worse than the American private, not because the German general was neglected, his rank secured him the best his nation could offer, but because his nation could no longer offer very much. Germany was strangled by blockade and total war, its food economy contracting, its diet narrowing and worsening from the home front to the highest ranks, so that even the privilege of a general could secure only a larger share of a shrinking and impoverished supply. The American private ate better than the German general, not because he was privileged, he was the lowest man in his army, but because his nation overflowed with abundance. America was a superabundant agricultural power, its farmland untouched by war, its productive capacity so vast that it could feed its lowest-ranking soldiers at a level that rivaled or exceeded what the enemy could secure for its elite. And the comparison between those two tables is one of the most complete pictures of the war that exists, because it reduces the vast abstractions of national wealth and productive capacity to the most human and visceral of terms. Rank is supposed to secure advantage. It is the whole logic of a hierarchy, and the American abundance was so overwhelming that it overrode rank across the armies, lifting the American private above the German general in the most basic matter of all, the food on the table. The German general, who understood that the enemy's privates ate better than he did, was confronting, in the most personal and humbling way, the truth that this entire channel has traced through every system and every decision, that he was fighting a nation whose material superiority was so vast that it dwarfed his own at every level, from the tank on the battlefield to the coffee in the cup, and that no amount of skill or courage or rank could overcome an imbalance so total that the enemy's lowest soldier lived better than its own highest. The Germans gave their best to their generals, and it was not enough. The Americans gave abundance to their privates, and it was more than the enemy's best. And in that single comparison, the lowest American eating better than the highest German, was written the entire, unbridgeable, war-deciding gap between a nation that had run short and a nation that overflowed. If this forensic audit gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It keeps this channel visible to the people who want the history the way it actually happened. Subscribe if you want the next audit, because there are more of these, more systems, more decisions, more of the invisible, unglamorous machinery that decided who won and who came home. And remember this about the two tables. Nobody makes a film about a meal, about the plain narrowing diet of a general whose nation was running short, or the abundant plate of a private whose nation overflowed. Food is too ordinary, too daily, too humble to seem like the stuff of history. And yet in those two meals, eaten on the same day on opposite sides of the same war, was written the whole truth of the thing. The general commanded thousands and ate the scarcity of a strangled nation. The private took orders from everyone and ate the abundance of a superabundant one. And the private's table was the better one, because behind the private stood a nation so rich that it fed its humblest men like the enemy's elite, and behind the general stood a nation so strained that it could no longer feed even its powerful the way it once had. Mostly, the American private ate well, without ever knowing that his ordinary meal was one of the truest measures of victory, that the full plate in front of him, taken for granted, was the war being won, 3 times a day, in the most human way there is. They deserve to be remembered, the ordinary soldiers who ate the abundance of a generous nation, and the cooks and the supply men who put it in front of them, by the humble, telling truth that in this war, the lowest man on the winning side ate better than the highest man on the losing one, and that there is no simpler or more complete picture of what overwhelming abundance really means, and of how, in the end, it wins.